Back to the Future. Could it actually happen with a real time machine?
In 1997, Mike Markham built a machine in his Missouri garage that made a steel screw vanish and reappear 6 inches away. He called a radio show to prove it was real. 3 weeks later, his garage exploded in flames. Firefighters found a circular burn mark scorched into the concrete floor. But Mike was gone. Everyone believed he died in that fire. Then, 25 years later, he appeared at a farmhouse door in Ohio. What he revealed was not a story of discovery. It was a warning that the machine had worked exactly as he hoped, and that was the worst thing that could have happened. Mike Markham was nobody important before he disappeared. Just a kid from Missouri who spent weekends digging through scrapyards instead of playing sports. While other teenagers worked summer jobs, Mike collected broken televisions, stripped copper wire from old appliances, and filled his garage with parts most people threw away. By his early 20s, that garage had transformed into something strange. Transformers salvaged from junkyards lined the walls. Car batteries sat stacked in corners. The concrete floor disappeared beneath scattered tools, and notebooks filled with sketches. Nobody else understood. Mike had no engineering degree. He taught himself by taking things apart and putting them back together until something worked. His neighbors thought he was dangerous. The lights in his garage glowed blue late into the night, while electrical hums vibrated through the walls. In late 1994, Mike built a Jacob's ladder. 2 thin metal rods, mounted upright in a V shape on a wooden base, connected to transformers from broken microwaves. When he powered it on, bright blue arcs of electricity crackled between the rods and climbed upward, like miniature lightning bolts. One night in January 1995, Mike placed a cheap laser pointer between the rods. The moment the beam cut through the gap, the wild electrical arcs stopped jumping randomly and became steady. The laser was stabilizing raw energy in a way Mike could not explain. He started dropping objects between the rods. Pennies fell straight through, nails did the same. Then he grabbed a steel screw and let it drop. Halfway down, the screw vanished. 3 seconds later, it reappeared on the wooden base, 6 inches from where it should have landed. He dropped it again. Same result. He repeated the test 20 times that night. Every single time, the screw disappeared and came back in a different spot. The next morning, Mike called Coast to Coast AM, a late-night radio show where people discussed unexplained phenomena. He described the Jacob's ladder, the laser, and the screw that vanished. The phone lines exploded with hundreds of callers. Some demanded proof. Others warned he was playing with dangerous forces. A few insisted he had discovered something revolutionary. Within 3 days, letters arrived at his house. Some contained anonymous threats. Others had cash inside from strangers wanting to fund his experiments. Mike pinned every letter to his garage wall. The warnings, the encouragement, the crumpled bills. All of it drove him forward, because he knew what he had seen was real. But proving it required more power than salvaged microwave transformers could provide. Mike bought a used camcorder and mounted it on a tripod facing his machine. Every experiment was documented. He adjusted the metal rods constantly, testing different voltages and angles. Results remained inconsistent. Sometimes objects vanished for 3 seconds, sometimes 5. Sometimes nothing happened. The pattern eluded him. In March 1978, Mike drove to the local power station at 2 a.m. and climbed the fence. 6 large industrial transformers sat behind the main building. He disconnected them one by one and loaded them into his truck. Back in his garage, Mike wired all 6 transformers together and connected them to his machine. When he flipped the switch, intense the metal rods glowed white hot as blue arcs expanded into a massive sphere that filled the entire garage. The hum shook tools off shelves and rattled windows. Then, every light went dark. Half of rural Missouri lost power instantly. Traffic lights failed across 3 counties. Hospitals switched to backup generators. Thousands of homes sat in darkness. Authorities traced the theft and power surge within 3 hours. Police arrived at dawn and found Mike sitting in his dark garage surrounded by smoking equipment. The judge sentenced him to 60 days in jail for stealing critical infrastructure and endangering thousands of people. Even behind bars, Mike filled notebooks with improved designs. Guards found him at 3 a.m. scratching equations into concrete walls with pebbles. The day he was released, Mike went straight back to work. This time he bought transformers legally and installed safety switches. He worked slower and more carefully. Anonymous letters kept arriving, with cash inside and notes saying, "Do not stop," or "Prove them wrong." By late 1995, the machine was operational again, but something had changed. Objects no longer vanished cleanly. They flickered, seeming to exist in two places at once. When they returned, they were damaged in impossible ways. A copper penny came back bent at 90 degrees. A new steel bolt returned, covered in rust. In early 1996, Mike tested a live mouse. The mouse survived passing through the field, but moved strangely afterward, with jerky motions, like film frames playing out of sequence. 3 hours later, the mouse was dead. Mike finally understood what his machine was really doing. He was not moving objects through space or time. He was tearing them apart at a level deeper than matter itself. By late 1996, Mike had stopped sleeping. His hands shook constantly, and dark circles made him look a decade older. He stopped answering his phone, while the machine hummed through garage walls at all hours. His mother begged him to stop. He told her he was almost finished. In December 1996, Mike called Coast to Coast AM one final time. The machine had evolved beyond his control. Objects were getting stuck between states. Animals came back damaged in ways he could not explain. He promised to call back in March 1997 with definitive results. March came and went with no call. Mike's phone rang unanswered for weeks. Some people drove to his house and knocked. No response. On a cold night in late March 1997, neighbors smelled smoke. Orange flames poured from the Markham garage. Firefighters arrived within 8 minutes and broke down the door. The equipment had melted into puddles on the floor. Copper wires hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. In the center of the concrete floor was a perfect circular burn mark, about 6 feet across. The concrete inside had been scorched black and cracked into pieces. There was no body, no bones, no remains of any kind. Firefighters searched every corner and sifted through ashes. They brought in trained dogs. Mike Markham had vanished completely. The fire marshal ruled it an electrical accident and closed the case within a week. One firefighter found a metal toolbox that had protected a single sheet of paper from the flames. On it, written in shaky handwriting, "It worked, but I am stuck." The firefighter showed it to his captain. They stared at it for a long time, then decided not to include it in the official report. They threw the paper away. Mike's mother held a memorial service 3 months later with an empty casket. Most people believed the extreme heat had cremated him completely, but some people believed something else. The ones who had heard him describe objects that vanished and never returned wondered if Mike had not died at all, if his machine had worked exactly as he hoped, and if that was the worst thing that could have happened. In the years after Mike disappeared, his story spread across the early internet. Message boards filled with theories. Some believed the machine had opened a portal through time. Others thought the energy had disintegrated him at the molecular level. Then, someone found an old newspaper article from 1930 about an unidentified body discovered on a California beach. The man had been wearing clothes that did not match the era. In his pocket, police found a small device covered in wires and buttons. Nobody could identify it. The case was never solved. The device was logged into evidence and lost in the 1950s. When researchers studying Mike's disappearance found this article, questions exploded. The description of the device matched sketches from Mike's notebooks. Could the body on the beach and the missing inventor be the same person? Had Mike's machine thrown him backwards 67 years through time? The theory suggested Mike had lived out his life decades before he was born, dying on that beach with the device still in his pocket. A perfect closed loop, with no beginning or end. The speculation raged for years, but without new evidence, the story faded into legend. Most assumed Mike had died in the fire. Then, in 2006, a physics professor in Oregon received an email from someone claiming to be Mike Markham. The message was brief, with attached blueprints labeled Vortex Stabilization Frame, Generation 3. The professor tried to reply, but the email bounced back. He traced it to a public library computer in Hawaii. When he contacted the library, staff said nobody had used that computer on the date the email was sent. The machine had been powered off for maintenance that entire day. Years passed, and the story faded again into internet obscurity. Then, in September 2022, 25 years after the fire, a young couple named Andrew and Melanie bought an old farmhouse in rural Ohio. While cleaning the attic, Melanie found a wooden box wedged between support beams. The metal plate on the lid read M. Markham, "Do not open until the right time." Inside were journals wrapped in plastic, circuit boards bound with tape, and an old Polaroid photograph. The photo showed a man in his 60s, standing next to a circular metal frame covered in wires. On the back was a date, June 21st, 2021. Below it, it worked. But not the way I thought it would. Andrew searched online and found the story of the garage fire and the missing inventor. The strangest discovery was in one of the journals. A page dated 2003 contained the exact address of their farmhouse, with detailed notes about magnetic field readings. As if Mike had known, 19 years earlier, that someone would buy this house and find his box. 2 weeks later, someone knocked on their door at dawn. Andrew opened it and found Mike Markham standing there, with a worn backpack and a folder. The man from the Polaroid. Alive. Real. Ready to explain where he had been for 25 years. Mike came inside and placed a folder on the kitchen table. The box had been hidden in the attic back in 2003, because this location had unusual magnetic stability. The night of the fire in 1997 had torn reality apart. At 11:47 p.m., Mike activated his machine at maximum power. The garage filled with blinding light as the electrical field expanded and engulfed the entire space. The moment the field touched him, Mike was ripped from normal time and thrown into a void between moments, a crack in reality where time stopped completely. He could see brief flashes of the real world, but could not reach any of it. His garage burning, police searching the wreckage, strangers walking through years later, all of it visible but untouchable. In 1999, Mike grabbed hold of one flash and pulled himself partially back. He appeared in Oregon, burned and disoriented, with no memory of how 2 years had passed. He tried to reach Missouri, but the void dragged him back before he could get there. For 23 years, Mike flickered between the void and reality. Sometimes he stayed solid for minutes, sometimes for weeks. During longer periods, he took jobs under fake names and slept in shelters, but the void always found him and pulled him back. In 2003, Mike discovered certain locations had stronger barriers between normal time and the void, places where magnetic fields were unusually stable. He spent months testing sites across the country. The Ohio farmhouse tested better than anywhere else. He broke into the empty house one night and hid the box containing everything he had learned. By 2021, Mike could resist the pull for months at a time. He rebuilt a smaller version of his machine to study what had happened. That was when he took the Polaroid Andrew and Melanie would find. In 2022, the pull stopped completely. Mike could finally exist in normal time without being dragged away. He never understood why the void released him. Maybe it had taken everything it needed. Maybe he had been gone so long that reality had forgotten. He was not supposed to be there. But during his time trap between moments, Mike had encountered others. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. A physicist from the 1960s experimenting with electromagnetic coils. An engineer from the 1980s who had built a rotating magnetic device. A woman from 2015 who remembered walking past a university laboratory before everything went dark. Some had been trapped far longer than Mike. One fragment of consciousness Mike encountered claimed to have been a scientist working on something called the Philadelphia experiment in 1943. The fragment could barely form coherent thoughts anymore, but kept repeating coordinates and dates from 80 years ago. Another had been there so long it had forgotten human language entirely, and communicated only through pulses of desperate awareness. Mike opened his folder. The void was not a single pocket of broken reality. It was a growing crack that connected across different times and places. Every time someone built a machine that manipulated space-time beyond its limits, they risked tearing a new hole that linked to the same void. With each new tear, the void expanded, and the barriers grew thinner. Strange incidents from recent years showed the void bleeding into reality, objects vanishing from locked rooms and reappearing in impossible locations, people experiencing missing time with no memory, electronic devices recording impossible timestamps, cell phones showing dates from decades past, security cameras capturing people who should not exist yet. The damage was permanent. Reality, once torn, did not heal. The hole stayed open forever. The only hope was stopping people from creating new tears before the void collapsed and dragged everything into oblivion. Mike handed Andrew a USB drive containing everything he had learned over 25 years. Every calculation, every observation, every attempt to understand what his machine had done. The information needed to be shared before someone else made the same mistake. But human curiosity was relentless. Somewhere right now, someone was probably building a similar device, convinced they had figured out what went wrong, certain they could control it, positive they would be different. The holes already torn in reality could not be closed. The damage was irreversible. The only option was preventing new incidents through warning others about what actually happened when physics was pushed beyond its breaking point. Mike revealed one final truth. The void was filling up with everyone who had ever been caught by a device like his. If enough people ended up trapped in that darkness, the void would collapse under its own weight. When that happened, it would not just destroy the people inside. It would tear reality apart so catastrophically that everything nearby would be dragged into the collapse. Possibly entire cities. Possibly entire regions. Possibly more. Mike stood and walked toward the door as the sun broke over the horizon. Before stepping outside, he turned back. Every person who built a machine like his believed they were special, that they would control it, that they would be different from everyone who failed before them. But the void did not care about intelligence or preparation. It just waited. Patient. Endless. Ready to catch anyone who tore reality far enough to slip through. Mike walked down the driveway and disappeared around the bend. Andrew and Melanie never saw him again. They kept the USB drive and journals for months, unable to decide what to do. Every time they considered posting the research online, fear stopped them. Mike's warning might become an instruction manual for someone who thought they could build a better version. 6 months later, strange things started happening in the house. Small objects would disappear for seconds and reappear in different rooms. A coffee mug would vanish from the kitchen and show up in the bathroom. Car keys would disappear from the table and reappear in the hallway. At first, they thought they were misremembering, but it kept happening, with increasing frequency. Andrew checked the magnetic field measurements from Mike's journals. The numbers had changed. The stability that made this location special was weakening. Whatever was happening to reality, it was accelerating. They moved out within 2 weeks and told the realtor nothing about Mike or the box or the strange occurrences. The house sold to a retired electrical engineer who mentioned he was excited to finally have space for his workshop. He had always dreamed of building experimental devices in a proper garage. Andrew wanted to warn him, but could not find words that would not sound insane. He handed over the keys and drove away. The machine Mike built was destroyed in the fire, but the knowledge survived, in hidden journals scattered across the country, in files on USB drives passed between researchers, in the minds of people who believed they could succeed where Mike failed. And somewhere in the space between 1 second and the next, the void continues to expand. Patient. Endless. Waiting for the next person who believes they can bend reality without being broken by it in return. The machine worked exactly as Mike hoped. It proved the impossible was possible. And that proof is the most dangerous thing he left behind. Because now, everyone knows it can be done. And knowing something can be done is all most people need to try. The question is not whether someone will build another machine. The question is whether we will notice the moment reality tears open one final time, or if we will simply flicker out of existence between one heartbeat and the next, never knowing we were ever here at all.